Welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's webinar is entitled Address Validation Processes and Tools, and I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar. Next, attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them up for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those too will be addressed during the Q&A session. Should we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email, and or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email address listed on the slide.
If you have additional questions, please contact Joyce Rose by emailing joyce@kassets.com.
Also, if you have any topics that you would like to recommend as potential webinars, please do not hesitate to contact me. Next. The Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau continues to provide a series of monthly webinars supporting information sharing and discussion. Understanding who is attending the webinars helps to identify content that is applicable for everyone participating in an agency's child welfare effort. Please self-select one of the 5 categories listed. My colleague Elizabeth will conduct the poll. Elizabeth?
Sure, let me go ahead and open up the poll so we can find out who we have on the call today. Okay, so the poll should be appearing on the audience screen. If you all can go ahead and click the category that best reflects your audience. If you're in a room with a group, if you could select the category that reflects the majority of your group membership. And we'll just give you guys another few seconds here to answer.
A poll appears on screen to assess the backgrounds of those attending the webinar. 30% are State Child Welfare Infosystem project managers. 70% are State Child Welfare Infosystem program, policy, or technical staff. 0% are Tribal Child Welfare Infosystem project managers. 0% are Tribal Child Welfare Infosystem program, policy, or technical staff. And 0% are ACF/Children's Bureau personnel or ACF contractor staff.
Okay, so it looks like we have pretty exclusively state staff here today. About 70% are program, policy, or technical staff, and the remainder are project managers.
Joyce continues.
That is not surprising that it's mainly state staff, because this topic is not only of interest to those on the technical side, but certainly those on the programmatic side. So let's meet today's participants. We have Christie Mitschke, who is the Batch and Interface Manager for the Texas Child Welfare Case Management System. James Sidebotham is a Data Quality Assurance Consultant for the California Child Welfare Case Management System, and Rob Thompson, who is an Interface Consultant for the California Child Welfare Information Systems. Christie, let's turn it over to you and start the webinar content.
Awesome. Thank you, Joyce. So glad to be with you guys today to talk about how Texas approached our address validation. As this slide indicates, we'll talk about what initial considerations we had, some decisions we made, problems that we solved, and some lessons we learned along the way, and then finish it up with some future system changes that we're considering. Next slide. All right, so just to give a little bit background, I think that most of y'all probably already know, but since 1991, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission has overseen and coordinated the planning and delivery of our programs in Texas. And we have about 11,400 employees and more than 290 offices hitting our system each day. Impact, which is the Information Management Protecting Adults and Children in Texas, is our official case management system. It's a browser-based system used agency-wide. It's also our CWIS system, of course, and it comprises of statewide intake, adult protective, child care licensing, and prevention, early intervention. To give you an idea of the size of our application, it's about 200 pages, 111 reports, 143 forms, 236 templates, and over 200 batch interface processes that exchange data with some of our external trading partners. Database is a terabyte in size and grows about 4 to 5 gigabytes per month. We're in the process of modernizing or replacing Impact, gearing toward modernizing the technology and while reducing our maintenance costs. And we actually finished batch modernization last March, and now we're moving into phase 1. So next slide. All right, so with our modernization project, we desired to update the address validation tool in Impact, again, with that effort to reduce the overall maintenance and subscription costs, along with adding some things that our current address validation software did not have, which was the latitude and longitude, the geocode data, and some other metrics. Proposed benefits that we were hoping to gain from switching tools, and this would be switching from current Code 1 solution to a different tool, was that we were hoping to verify and correct addresses, add missing elements, as I mentioned, standardizing columns within Impact tables, and then across other agency applications as well. And then adding those statuses and metrics that I mentioned used to evaluate the address. And then we also wanted to meet, of course, the expectations of the postal system for mailing, because there's always a varying degree of postal compliance. And then there were some other options, too, that we had learned of about global address cleaning across your database, and then also some fast complete options, which I'll talk about here coming up. Next. So as I talked about, we wanted to standardize the column lists and add the latitude, longitude, and statuses and other metrics provided by a new solution, and provide our customers the completeness, consistency, and validity of American addresses to meet the stringent requirements of the U.S. Postal System. This just gives you an idea of those added columns that we did not have in our address tables, and there's field links. Next. So initially, we knew that we would need to prove to ourselves that the product we were potentially switching to was a comparable option. So we actually compared 5 products: Google Maps, Melissa Doctor, USPS Address Validation, our existing Code 1, and then Informatica's Address Doctor. And we after comparing, we narrowed it down to use Informatica's Address Doctor. Once we did that, we obtained a temporary development license and then started a proof of concept, because we didn't want to start modifying code until we had really knew that this was going to work. So we actually took a file of over 50,000 unverified addresses, one that we had from one of our applications, and we ran it through both the existing tool and the new proposed Address Doctor. And so here it just shows you a little bit of statistics. The one of significance is the 16,516 that did not match. So that, kind of raised our eyes a little bit. And we had some other matches that maybe happened because the data was bad in the file, and so we had to go through figuring out what we had. But of those 16,000 that didn't match, about 8,500 were because of an issue with the actual mapping that we have actually a line 1 and line 2 address in our system, and it was moving some things on line 2 to line 1, which was inconsistent with our current implementation. And so we had meetings with the vendor, and their suggestion actually was that we increase the column links to 50 characters for all of our address line 1, line 2, city, state, and we went and did an analysis of the cost and time and resources for that sort of change, and we found that change would not be a feasible solution given the fact that we were in modernization, we were trying to do all this, and it just wasn't good. It was going to be too big. So technical staff actually sat down with the vendor, and we improved the mapping and did some additional configurations to better utilize line 2 in the application. And then just to speak a little bit in that last bullet is our current user interface interaction is where the user actually puts in a complete address and then hits a validate button. and then they are presented an address, and they can either accept or not accept the address that's presented to them. So I just want to mention that as we go into the discussion here. So next slide. All right, so what did we decide to do? We decided on the product. We had to agree on the additional requirements. So we said that we wanted to verify and correct the addresses just as the existing tool did. We wanted to add the missing elements, like I've already mentioned, standardize the tool across all of our applications. And then we also wanted to, and also against the back-end process, to the batch process. So now our online application was going to use the same validation process as our as our back-end. The vendor actually then recommended to us that we do the sweeping through of all of our addresses in our system, and we decided against that option. This was due to our thoughts around the fact that a caseworker actually accepts, like I mentioned, or verifies a validated address when they choose it, and that these addresses are part of the caseworker's documentation. IT wasn't comfortable with making this type of change to sweep through addresses and change them because we consider that frozen caseworker data, and we wanted to consider, think about that a little bit more, so we decided against that at this time. But an interesting option that we did choose to go with was the Fast Complete. It was the newest feature that we decided to use, and go on to the next slide, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's a feature that that offers suggestions as you begin to type in an address. It's called Fast Completion, and it's used primarily when you have quick address entry applications. So someone's on the call with someone, and they're giving them limited amounts of information, so they can put partial data. And as in this example, you'll see it's typed in 2323 Ridge under address line 1. And to the right, it'll start showing you addresses, kind of like a smart lookup. And then you can actually click on one of those, and you don't have to do any more entry. You can select one of those at that time. And the idea of callers being given limited amounts of information, the system being able to accept that information as it is received and offer suggestions, it was just an efficiency that we just did not want to pass up. So that is going to be in our phase 1 solution. So how did we code it and validate it? Wanted to focus on the fact that we did have to modify 23 user interface pages in our impact application. Testers performed side-by-side testing to validate the tool, entering, in the application, the old application and the new modified one. And they also developed a very helpful tip sheet that we used, because there are going to be some noticeable differences in the behavior of how the old and new address validations will work. And so they put the tip sheet together so that as we were going through those and we found one of the differences, we could say, oh yeah, that's one that we've accepted. An example of that would be like abbreviations. Maybe in the existing application you could type in HWY for highway and it would be okay. Now it might be spelled out. So those differences were accepted. Then we needed to verify the geocode and the latitude and longitude data, and we used Google Maps, Bing, and the USPS Postal Service page to verify that. And at that point, we ran into a problem. We learned that the geocode information that we had gotten from the vendor, or the data that we'd gotten from the vendor, was not right at the front door. There was actually better data available, and so we had to. It was like better levels of accuracy that you could get, and so we had to ask for additional data sets to get more accurate results. Once we installed that, we were able to get right to the front door. So then we took a different approach for testing our batch and interface processes, because there's so many thousands and thousands of records that you have to test. We actually utilized a process that we used during the 2015 batch modernization project that I mentioned, where the DFPS DBA created a process to compare two database sets in their entirety and report the differences. So you take two duplicate databases from a point in time and run the existing batch or the existing address validation batch one way, and then run the new solution in the other, and then you can just create a report of the differences. That process easily told us that the results were comparable, and then we were able to use the tip sheet to explain away the ones that were acceptable. then we, because we didn't have geocode in the old solution, we had to verify that the same way we had done with the application. And testing has gone fairly smooth, and we completed the online testing. We're still finalizing the batch testing. Next. So for future considerations, we are looking at the need for accepting and validating international addresses, which would actually be an additional licensing cost for that data set. And then we are considering the global address sweeping or cleansing. We want to think about that a little bit because we think that it could benefit our caseworkers, but we're thinking that maybe we would prompt them in some way to tell them that a better address is available. So running a process sweeping through but then storing that somewhere else to say, hey, this is a better address is available. You can either choose to accept that new address or maybe inform them to go and revalidate those addresses. So that's something we're considering. And then also we're considering further modernizing our system to integrate the geocode data for location of facilities or schools and services, and possibly for the caseworker travel planning, like their most efficient route planning to help with the cost of travel. And that's really all I have until we have questions later, so I would like to turn it over now to, I can't remember his name, James, I think?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry. Go away, James.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to talk about California's child welfare system and how we standardized over 40 million addresses. Kind of go through some of the decisions that were made, any problems we solved, and some of the lessons learned. And then we'll talk about some of the future system changes that are being discussed. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background about this project. We are a child welfare system. We're managed by the Office of Systems Integration, that's OSI. We're serving Department of Social Services within Health and Human Services within California. Our system was released in the late 1990s. It's a client service system. We have DB2 sitting on the mainframe and a VB front end. Very latest tech in the time. It's grown to over 1.2 billion records in the database, and we have something around 120,000 clients. There is a replacement system. It's on the way, and it's going to be rolled out in various pieces. Rob is from the new system, and he can talk about some of that in his section. So because of this new system on the horizon, it really made an impact what the scope was and how much funds could be allocated for our address standardization solution. But we still wanted to move ahead. 2 years ago, I was brought on the project as a data quality assurance consultant. Working closely with the state, we've developed a data quality team, put together a data quality strategy, and created a data quality framework. Covers lots of various components, such as communication and reporting, as well as cleansing. And the final piece was our data quality portal. So it's an online portal, very important tool for us for collaboration, information, reporting, and issue tracking. And then we put together a data quality work group. This is a small, high-level work group consisting of a small group of data stakeholders, a lot of county representation, technical and program-orientated. And the goal of the group is to review data quality issues, prioritize them, try and solution these, and the group act as a subject matter experts. Next slide, please. So, how do non-standard addresses impact child welfare services? Well, firstly, there's a data quality issue. We have a lot of duplicate records in our system, thanks mainly to no validation in the screens, and over time that's given us large volumes of duplicates. So automated processes were created to try and run some de-duplication through merging records into one master record. However, with that, the matching criteria does contain some address fields. So you can see in the slide this example of those 3 records. We can all tell it's the same facility, but very small variances in the address data meant that those records couldn't merge. They'll remain as three as opposed to merging into one record. That was one of our main issues. Fit for use business purpose, if it's an address field, it should really only contain address information. Again, because of lack of edits through the system, these address fields are free format. So there's all kinds of things in those fields. Email addresses, phone numbers, notes, strange characters. So this really affected our searching capability. So as part of our analysis, we can get a list of non-compliant data, and we can target those for some future cleansing. And then reporting. We have disaster preparedness reports, and they were a concern whether they accurately reflect address information, especially in a state such as ours where we have wildfires and earthquakes and occasional flooding when it rains. And we had some proximity reports, so not necessarily geolocation reports, but more centered around a zip code or a city, reflecting services in the catchment area. And we had external users of our data, county data warehouses. They were affected by some bad address information. Some other states or programs may have issues with printing costs. We don't have to print mass mail or anything, but that could be a concern for some other organizations. Next slide, please. So how did we implement this process? Well, firstly, we had to sit down and define our requirements. So did we want to standardize all the records, or did we want to select from a point in time? We took the approach of just doing address cleansing on everything, all existing records, way back from beginning of time. We had no address standardization requirements set through the agency, so we went the route of standardizing to adhere to the USPS Publication 28 Postal Address Standards. So we chose a standard, and we're going to stick to it. And we know that the tools have various capabilities to enrich the current data, such as geocoding, just like Texas did, or barcode data. But for us, that would require database changes and application front-end changes. So the decision was no metadata would be captured. And again, this is all because cost was a huge factor in this. We wanted this solution to be a fully automated process. We didn't want to burden the county with any workload. So we wanted it to be all behind the scenes. We want them to focus on other areas of the business, not necessarily in looking up bad addresses. So we planned on performing a one-time cleansing of all the addresses. And from then on, we thought, well, we'll do some incremental updates as we get new addresses into the system. And then the solution would be a direct update in the database. So there'll be no front-end real-time validation and checking. Like I say again, this was all cost-orientated, and we know new systems on the horizon, so Rob can talk about that piece. So it was all purely back-end for us. Next slide, please. So this is a very, very high-level diagram of what we did. We took on the majority of the development internally within the project. This was to help, again, reduce the costs from the legacy prime vendor. And the address tool we've chosen is from a vendor known as Smarty Streets. They're a vendor who work with Zillow, amongst others. And we built a completely automated process through an intermediary data quality database, whose main functions were to receive a raw file from our legacy mainframe system, perform some pre-checks and packaging, and send that for standardization. We'll then handle that returned standardized data, package it, and send it back to the legacy. While we're all doing that, we'll have a full audit trail of all the records that were changed before and after snapshots. We wanted to collect statistics. This is all part of our transparency in our data quality framework. And then we're going to publish those results to our data quality portal so county staff can go and see results. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we had the data quality framework, and one of the many pieces is communication. So we wanted to collaborate with the county staff right from the beginning and throughout the whole process. So a data quality work group played a huge role. The address change request originated from a data quality issue submitted within the work group, and it was one of the top priorities that the counties were begging for. So that was very important. And the work group also acted as a SME panel throughout the whole process, providing input. We made lots of on-site visits to counties, many months prior to implementation, where we talked about the changes, provided demos and how the data was going to look. And we had many county staff take part in a county test workshop, like a user acceptance testing, which they gave us feedback on that, and it was mostly positive. It was good feedback. And then lastly, we used our portal, that data quality portal. We posted information there, some training materials, and based on feedback we'd received from the counties, we put together FAQs up there for everyone to gain access to. Next slide, please. So, how did we do and how did we get that out to the counties? Well, from our full production database, as you can see here, we processed over 40 million address records and had a standardization rate of around about 90% for the entire state. Majority of changes were street name, which we expected, because the street name contains the avenue or Ave or all the different ways that a user can come up with spelling a certain street. Everything was in there. So that was a real big change. And the zip codes as well were enhanced a lot, especially the zip +4 for locations. We made sure there was no expectations for county to fix any addresses that didn't get standardized. So there were no reports given back to the county saying, here's the ones that failed, you must go fix them. It was just purely moving forward standardization approach. And what we did notice once we've gathered all of our results, out of those 40 million addresses, we actually only have around about 6 million unique addresses. That's a lot of duplicates we have in our system. Trying to reduce those duplicates is going to be future activity, and that's going to benefit a whole bunch of areas. And referring back to that diagram earlier, we did post the metrics to our data quality portal. I just want to give you a couple of snapshots on that look for the counties. So can we go to the next slide, please?
A website screenshot featuring a data summary of the statewide success rate of address standardization by county in California.
This is a snippet from our data quality portal. This is like a statewide look from our release when we implemented this. Purely informational. Perhaps counties will use it as bragging rights between the neighbours, but it's purely how did we do it in terms of percentage-wise success rates. We did give a county the ability to drill down. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, for example, this is Fresno. We were able to show results of the addresses by functional area of the application, so percentage success, and then as well as some hard numbers. Again, this is no county expectation no workload is expected on the county, but a county can request for some information. For example, we had one county look at this report, and they noticed one particular area had a low success rate, and that could be down to a training issue. Maybe the user responsible for that address data entry is doing something that's non-compliant, so they took that with them. These are all based on our Big Bang. This is the one-time implementation, so it's all static. We are going to work on some dynamic reports that will show progress over time for standardization, so the counties can come along and make sure that they're still getting standardized at a good success rate. We did plan this initially to have a monthly incremental, but the counties have said we want more frequently, so we're moving now to a weekly incremental just because they like it so much. Next slide, please. So after all that, what were some of the lessons learned that we had from this? Straight from our point of view. For us, communicate and collaborate. We involve users, business community early on and often. They provided great input and questions. It may seem obvious, but try not to work in a silo. spring this up, Monday morning with, hey, we've got all these clean addresses. Be proactive and reactive where you can. So if you can stop the bad data coming into your database through application, cost permitting, that's great, just like Texas did. But going with this direct database update path like we did is also a cost-effective way to get the job done. So it's whatever you can work with your budget and your scope. Auditing and transparency. So always have a trail of what changes are made. It should always be a best practice. That's good for metric collection and analysis in the future. Be transparent with the whole process. Users really care about the data and like to see what happened to it. And especially if this was altered by an external process, who tend to get a little nervous about that. And that's everything from my perspective. That's the end of my section. I'm going to hand it over to Rob Thompson, who's on the new system team, to talk about future direction.
Hello, thanks James. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So I'll give you a little background on what we're doing with California's new Child Welfare Digital Services Project. We are starting to build California's new child welfare system, and we've just started with our first vendor, and the first section that they'll be working on will be using some of the new address validation techniques that we'll be talking about that we've already actually talked a little bit about too, that Christie touched on and James as well. So let's see, I'll jump right into it here. So with the new system, one of the things that we're trying to do is allow for capturing the address and reconciling addresses at the time they're entered. And so we're going to be adding some checks in to allow a caseworker to enter in addresses and check them to make sure that they're both formatted correctly, which Christie talked about for USPS mailings, but also to verify that it's physically deliverable, because you can have a well-formatted address, but it doesn't necessarily exist. Well-formatted being that it's formatted in the USPS-approved format with the right zip code and state and etc. Names for streets and avenues and boulevards and that kind of thing. And then the third thing that we're going to do is try and begin adding GIS data for future use that would allow us to do various kinds of reporting based on the proximity to a location or different facilities that are near a location for a child or a school or that kind of thing. And then so I'll talk in a second about that. That's one of the challenges that we have that I'm sure many of the folks on this call are aware of. If you can go to the next slide, please. So in addition to validating an address, we have to be able to accommodate lots of different types of locations, and that's one of the reasons why address is always free format, or has been historically free format in many of the different system implementations, because a lot of the clients for our cases, they may not have a normal standardized address that we can deliver to. They may have an international address, they may have a PO box or even a general delivery address, or they may be homeless and their address is like the example I have here, under the bridge at 10th Street, and we still need to allow for that. And so we're hopeful that some of the new facilities that we'll be building in to allow for a non-standard address that still can go through a filter of making sure that we have something in there that will allow us to do searches, whether it's a real address, mailable address, or a GIS location. We'll be working on those. Let's see. So I'll jump to the next slide, please. We're we're still real early in our process with the new system, so we're looking at several different vendors, but we anticipate using the Google geocoding service because there's some history with the department using that, and so we've been working on some prototypes, and if I could, I'd like to do a quick little demo just for those of you who may be new to some of the capabilities, so it can give you some of the ideas of what can be done. So I think if I can show my screen here, you should be able to I'm hopeful that you guys can. I can't tell if everybody can see my screen, but I'll go ahead and pretend or assume you can. So this is just a little demo that I built to help us talk about what we can and can't do. I'll go ahead and enter in an address here so you can see. If I enter in an address to validate it, and all I'm going to do is just enter in some free-form address information here. If I submit this, I sent this off to the Google service that is without getting too geeky, it uses a RESTful service API, and it sends back, I basically have interpolated the results here to say, yeah, it's a valid address, and there's lots of data that comes back with this. And without going into a whole lot of detail on this, examples of the kinds of things that we can get from this is that even though I entered just a city and a state, it will go and match up and say, oh, well, here's the zip code, here's the extended zip code, and then I also have different kinds of latitude and longitude that will be the basis for my GIS information. So that's an example of an address that is both in a correct format, and by correct format it means after they do their formatted addressing on it, there's my full formatted address that meets USPS standards. So then, and that's what I would save in our system database, is the correct formatted address. If I enter in now an address that's close, this is the next address that I'll enter in is an address that it's a valid format, but it's not deliverable, meaning that this actual address doesn't exist. It looks very similar to the previous address I entered, and I can show you here. I get all my details, very similar details, but Google says this isn't an exact match, and it gives me latitude and longitude coordinates. So if for the first address that I entered, I've gone to Google Maps now. The first attitude's geocode information, or the GIS information, is actually right on top of this house. That's the exact match. For the second address, this address that I entered in, Google says it's a valid format, but it's not deliverable. If I go look at the GIS information, it puts me in a location that doesn't match to an exact house, but it's close. It's saying you're close, but this is an exact match, so you need to enter better data. And of course, this little demo is just to show addresses. It's not a real application. In a real application, I'd then present the user with different options of, can you choose near something nearby, or here's other houses that are nearby, or that kind of thing. So then the last little example I'll give is if I enter in an address that this particular address doesn't exist in the town of Folsom. So Google tells me this is not the correct format, and it's not deliverable, but it doesn't exist for USPS to send it to. But what Google will do is give me several different address matches that are nearby, and kind of like what Christie was showing. And this capability, by the way, isn't unique to Google. There's lots of. I'm not trying to show that Google has the best address capability. This is just showing you an example of what some of these vendors can do. Is that it will, in the message I get back, I get multiple addresses from which a caseworker could choose. It would be displayed in a better way, of course. This is the geeky tech version of the response. But it would be displayed in a way that a caseworker could choose from several different addresses if they were close. similar again to what Christie was showing of that fast complete feature. That's really it. If there's any questions, then I can address those during the question time. But that's just a quick overview of where California's new system development is at with our address validation. I'll turn it back to
Joyce.
Coordinator. Great,
Yes.
Thanks, Joyce.
Yes, Christie and James and Rob, thank you so very much. That was absolutely excellent, very interesting. And I might add that this is the first time in our entire webinar series over the years that we have actually done a live demo. So having discovered that, we have more capability in future webinars. So that's great. Let's open up the phone lines and the chat to our webinar attendees for any questions and answers from our presenters. So Elizabeth, will you manage this, please?
Certainly. So go ahead and type any questions that you have into the chat box in the GoToWebinar feature, or Erica, can you let us know how folks can line up on the phone and ask questions verbally?
Yes. If you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by 1. You'll be prompted to record your first and last name. That is star 1 if you'd like to ask a question over the phone.
Okay. And at this time, I don't have anything in the question box, so again, remember that that's an option as well if you prefer to type your question for us instead of coming on the phone.
Well, this is Joyce, and I have a question, and it is to James. And basically, if any of your state colleagues are interested in learning more about your data quality portal, if they would send me their interest, can I forward that to you for a response?
Yes, by all means.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so we have some questions. It looks like Georgia, I think, has some questions, so if you can either type them in or come onto the phone line. And we do have a question in the box. Can speakers give an idea of the costs of the various options and efforts to date?
This is James. I'll go ahead first. We obviously said cost was a big consideration for us, so we went with a very cheap option by a lot of internal development. Myself and my co-worker Andy Leong worked a lot on building this intermediary database. There were some changes the prime vendor had to do for the extraction of the data and then putting the data back. So that was the costly piece. I think there'll be no shock there. I think the cost was around about $500,000 from the vendor for all their changes. And in terms of the license for us for the software, we have a yearly subscription to the tool, and I think it's like $10,000 a year, which even just for a one-time would have been great. But we can also use this for this incremental for a weekly. So, and I think that's money well spent for us. So, overall, I think that it was a good cheap option for us.
Christie answers.
Yeah, and as far as for Texas, I know that Code 1 solution was quite costly, and that was one of the main reasons why we were looking to get to something else. Our HHC Enterprise had the Informatica license, but we're having to pay a little bit for the subscription costs directly for the address doctor, but it's way less. I mean, we're talking probably an annual Code 1 fee of anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 per year, down to, I want to say it's more like 10 or so. So it's going to be a significant cost savings.
Excellent. Thank you. So our first question from Georgia, and this is for both Texas and for California, did you have to upgrade to spatial databases?
James answers.
This is California. No, because we couldn't do any database changes. Every field was pre-existing, so it basically was just a scrub of the data. So we just replaced existing data in those fields. Our intermediary database we created was just SQL Server, very basic, that captured all the data. So there's nothing like that going on. It's very straightforward, database and tables.
And Texas uses Oracle database, and we did not have to upgrade to use either solution.
Excellent. Erica, do we have any questions on the phone?
Yes, our first question comes from Mr. Andrew Eastman. Your line is open.
Thank you. We in Wisconsin are actually looking at this exact item right now. We're in the very early stages. The first question I have to both states is we have a lot of hesitation from our management and our policy staff about doing any kind of a online edit that forces an address into a record. Can you guys talk a little bit about whether when an address goes through the validation tool, is there like a threshold level where that address is automatically applied? Do you always prompt users to select either the validated address or allow them to choose the input address? And if there is that mechanism to continue forward with the input address that was not fully validated, is there a way that you flag that or indicate that so that future viewers of that address are aware that it's not a validated address?
Christie answers.
I can speak for Texas really quickly. We do prompt the users with we have edits where they have to validate the address before they can continue, or at least go through that process. They can look at the address and say, oh, that's just not, it's not good. I'm going to continue with the one that I had inputted. But there will be further edits as you go through the system where they'll have to go through that again. So we're hoping as they move through the system and get going through from intake to investigation type, that they're getting more information, better information, and then they'll validate again. But there are thresholds with our new tool that we will be hoping to utilize where they give you levels of valid or levels of I changed the address and here's what you have. There are a lot of options out there to use those different codes or statuses to make decisions. You just have to kind of configure it how you want it. That answer your question for us anyway?
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. Thank you.
James answers.
And then for California, like I say, users are very worried about data being changed, and that's why we wanted to involve the counties early on. And they're the one really crying out for this. Excuse me, with our approach, because it's purely back-end, if someone puts in a bad address that's incorrect, we're not going to change that to, well, this is kind of close, this is the nearest house on the street. It's basically, is that address going to be standardized, if it's the city correct, the way the street name, the zip code, whatever. We do capture in our internal database whether it's mailable or not. So all that information, we do store that. So if a county says, well, give me all those addresses which are not mailable, we want to go and look at those. Given our volume, we've got over 4 million that meet that need. There's no expectation, but a county is more than welcome to say, let me see addresses which are not mailable. But we don't, if we do not change the numbers to something close enough. It's just the existing data.
And another reason why Texas decides to do the validation, we need zip code data, especially for reporting. So a lot of times reporting is dependent on the data, and so we're trying to force the users to get the right data in there so that we can do reporting on where are most of our clients, which zip codes are they in, so that management can use that to make decisions as to where staff need to be located and even getting down to ethnicities and race and ethnicities and worker and disproportionality. So we use it for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, same with that zip code was another big piece of this. Enhancing it with the zip +4 piece was really good, just for the same sort of reports, proximity reports.
Great, thank you. That helps a lot. And if Joyce will permit me, I have a second question as well. I'm wondering if each of you could also just give the very quick version of what your process was for kind of reviewing different vendors and how you ultimately decided on a vendor. Kind of how long did that process take for you to kind of vet your different possible vendors and make that final solution? We have not even started to look at any potential vendors yet. It would be great to have an idea of kind of what that process looked like for each of you.
Well, I can speak for us. I mean, a lot of that stuff is so visible out there, and we're constantly testing our data, and even our process. So as part of a validation process, we're looking to the different things that are out there, like Google Maps, and the things that I mentioned. So a lot of times we've got technical staff looking at that ahead of time. So it might be a long time of looking, but when we got down to it, we knew we had narrowed it down. And of course, cost was a big factor, for as I've mentioned several times. But it's kind of hard to say. You have to be looking at that all the time, is what I would say.
Yeah, for California, for the legacy system, we thought, well, let's go with Google. Everyone's using Google, so we reached out to those at first, but they don't do a batch update process that we needed. They do all the front end stuff, like in Rob's demo, which is great, but for us, for that for the historical data cleansing, that they didn't have that facility. So then we just started looking at the different vendors, and cost was a definite factor into that. We began, some of these vendors will give you a cost per million rows, and given our large volume, and the fact that we wanted to test and test and test, so we wanted to run this through the cycle many times, that cost was going to get huge. So for us, the vendor we chose was really, really economical for us.
Rob answers.
I'd add that from the new system side, really a big chunk of the reason why we're using Google is because there's some history already with the Department of Social Services, one of our sponsor, on using that, and so that plus the fact that they're a well-known vendor of this kind of thing, that was just the reason we got started with them. As James mentioned, there are some definite limitations, and I know from that the Google pricing is based on tiered usage, so you can use it for free up to a certain number of requests a month, and beyond that you need to have a license, and or else they'll basically shut you off. So, but I don't know exactly the cost yet. That's what we'll be exploring with the project, and we may end up choosing vendors, or changing vendors. Sorry, but that was the big start for us.
And for Texas too, someone was within the enterprise, like I'd mentioned, was using the Informatica products, so that leaned us more towards that. We had already had a history a little bit with them, and it was a significant cost savings.
Elizabeth continues.
Erica, do we have other questions on the line?
No, at this time we have no other questions in queue.
Okay, so we do have some follow-up questions from Georgia. For California, they actually didn't hear the answer that you gave on the estimated cost for Smarty Streets, so if you could provide that again.
Yeah, and I don't get a cut of this, unfortunately, but it's $10,000 a year is a subscription.
And also for California, as you were standardizing your addresses, once you identified potential duplicates, did someone have to manually verify them?
No, we have a program that's so strict with the criteria, so it looks at every piece of the address, so it purely has to be an exact duplicate that will help with the merges. And we've seen that our duplicate reports have identified so much more duplicates than we expected, which is a good thing. So we're actually seeing real duplicate data now.
Erica, do we have any other questions on the line?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Joyce, I think I'm going to go ahead then and turn it back over to you to... Oh, wait, we do have one that's just come in through the chat. So I have part of a question, address historical changes. So I'm not entirely sure what the question is. Mark, if you want to go ahead and push *1 and come onto the phone, maybe you can let us know what your question is and not have to type it in. And I tell you what, while we're waiting to see if Mark wants to give us a little bit more detail, Joyce, why don't I go ahead and advance it and let you just talk about next month's webinar?
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
First of all, I want to thank our presenters, and I also want to thank those of you who called in, because the dialogue was excellent. That's how we share information and learn from each other, as opposed to reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. So, based on that, we hope the information shared with you today was very informative and valuable to you. Our July webinar is going to explore the topic of data quality plans. As a reminder, please remember to register for that webinar once the announcement is released. Additionally, if you have any questions regarding today's topic for our presenters, or would like more information about any of our scheduled webinars, or would like to volunteer your state as a topic presenter, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email address listed on the slide. Again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, we will send a message via the CWIS Managers listserv with the link.
If you have additional questions, please contact Joyce Rose by emailing joyce@kassets.com. A recorded version of each of the webinars will be available for viewing online at https://www.acf.hhs.gov/programs/cb/research-data-state-systems/training.
So, Elizabeth, did our person resend the question?
No, I don't have anything in the chat box. Erica, do we have anyone in queue for the phone?
No, there's no one in the phone queue.
Okay, well, we do, Joyce, you have posted your email address, so certainly if there are any follow-up questions, please email them to us and we will do our best to get you an answer. And so with that, I think we will go ahead and conclude today's call. I want to thank everyone for participating, and especially our facilitator, Joyce, and our panelists today. Thank you so much.
And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.